Hi guys, great to be with you again. My name is Michael Millerman. I make videos on philosophy and politics. And today I want to talk to you once again about Heidegger's notion of Dasein. So the first thing you should know is that before Heidegger, for example, in the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, the German word Dasein means existence in the sense of the existent thing. So for example, you could talk about the Dasein of a tree, you could talk about the Dasein of a cup, you could talk about the Dasein of any old thing. And in the same way, you talk about the Dasein of the human being. And Heidegger made an extremely important observation. Now, it's not so easy to understand necessarily when you read him if you don't have the background in understanding dense philosophy, but I think it's something that I can convey to you here informally, quickly in this video. So he said, all philosophers have done something that we ourselves have a tendency to do, but it's a mistake. So we have a tendency to do it, but it is not something that we should do if we're trying to understand what it is to be, what it is to be human, what it is to be anything. And that tendency is that we take the way that we interpret the world and we interpret ourselves through the same lens. So in other words, we take, for example, my cup as an existing thing, as an extant thing, as a thing that's just there, as an objective thing, okay? Or my pen, my paper, my computer, whatever, okay? The world of objects and the way that we understand them, the way that we understand what it is to be an object, what it is to be a thing, what it is to be a useful instrument or an implement lying at hand, a tool, okay? And we treat the human being as the same sort of thing. Now, you might think, come on, what are you talking about? I don't treat the human being as a cup of water. I don't treat the human being as a pen or pencil or piece of paper or book, because haven't philosophers always distinguished, for example, between the animate and the inanimate, and between different ways in which something can be alive or ensouled? So I'll give you an old example. Aristotle says that you have, for example, the vegetable soul, which is shared with all plant life. After all, plant life has nourishment and growth, doesn't it? The animal soul, which includes also a certain sort of locomotion and perception. And then, let's say, the human soul with its specific acts of intellection. So you have these distinct, okay, they're all ensouled in a certain way, but there are these different ways of being, of the plant, of the animal, of the human being, maybe of angels, if you wanted to go up above even the human realm. So what does Heidegger really mean? Well, when he did his study of Kant, when he did his study of Descartes, when he did his study of what we ourselves are liable to do in the ordinary course of our lives, he said, fine, you might say the human being has different properties. Okay, I have different properties than the paper, cup, pen, pencil, camera, and computer. Obviously, I have different properties, but I'm still a thing with properties. Okay, I'm still a thing with properties. So underlying the interpretation of the human being is still a specific notion of thingliness or thinghood, or what it is to be anything. And Heidegger said you can sort of see that in the fact that there's no distinction, even in some fundamental terminological way. In Kant, you have the word Dasein, as I said, applied to mean both the existence of non-human things and the existence of human beings. In Descartes, you have the idea that there are two fundamental kinds of thing: extended thing and mental thing. Okay, he uses the Latin res, R-E-S, from which we get reality and so on. Okay, it's a similar root there in the words. And Heidegger says, look, what you must understand, why all philosophers prior to Heidegger have hit a stumbling block in their understanding of many fundamental questions, but in particular the fundamental question what it is to be human, as well as, for example, why, when we think about things, do we distinguish between their essence and their existence? What they are and that they are. Heidegger says that's a puzzle. We need to try to understand where that comes from. And other sorts of puzzles that he's interested in, he tries to understand where they all come from. And he says the reason philosophers prior to Heidegger himself have not made a fundamental breakthrough. Now, they've made incredible discoveries, they have eternal significance. What they accomplish for philosophy can never be taken away from them. But still, from Heidegger's perspective, they somehow fail to break through to the correct domain in which they can pose their problems and questions and actually begin to answer them. So he says a lot, he writes this over many, many hundreds and in effect thousands of pages. Okay, so I'm giving you a quick breakdown here of it. And what he says is they have failed to inquire properly into the being of the human being. They lack the methodological access for that. They don't understand that they're treating the being of the human being in the same way as they're treating the being of non-human beings by categorizing both of them as a res extensa, or a mental thing, as Dasein, the Dasein of the human being or the Dasein of the tree. They don't understand that human existence is somehow the genuine ground and basis and foundation for the possibility of understanding being and thinking about the being of human and non-human things. So in Heidegger's writing and Heidegger's thinking and Heidegger's work, Dasein no longer means the existence of any extant thing. Book, pen, paper, coffee cup, camera, television, tree. Dasein is reserved to mean human existence specifically. And human existence is analyzed as having a fundamentally different structure, fundamentally different character than non-human existence. It's not just, as it were, the same sort of thing but with different properties. It's totally different. And it requires a completely different type of analysis. And Heidegger shows you why, and he also shows you what it looks like to do this sort of analysis. For example, in Being and Time, one of his famous books, which I teach in my school, millermanschool.com, and other of his lecture courses, he explains why this is necessary, why it is that we can't understand the being of things unless we understand how ontology, the study of being, the science of being, is rooted in the correct analysis of the being for whom being is a question, the human being. Okay, trees do not raise the question what it is to be. Books do not raise, as books, the question what it is to be. I mean, people write in books what it is to be, but my coffee cup can't ask what it is to be. My watch can't ask what it is to be. My son's, what's this thing called again? Magnifying glass. Can't raise. Only the human being can raise the question what it is to be, because the question of the meaning of being, the question of the truth of being, the inquiry into being, it takes place in language, which means that language itself has a fundamental ontological significance that must be understood. What is logos? What is speech? What is discourse? What is our ability to uncover things as they are, if we have that ability at all, to cover things up so that they're unclear to us? How can speech conceal? How can it distort? How can it hide? What are the various ways in which it can show? What is showing at all? Why does showing and appearing have to do with being at all? Is seeming and showing and appearing like a second-rate version of being? Or is seeming and showing and appearing the way that being sort of emerges? Okay, so we won't get into all the nuances and all the difficulties, but the key thing that you must know, the key idea from this video, as you begin to try to understand Heidegger's terminology, as you make some effort in progressing in your understanding of Heidegger's thought, Dasein used to just mean any sort of existing thing. Heidegger, as it were, greedily, says no, we should reserve the word Dasein all for ourselves, for the human being, for human existence. We should set the human being apart as fundamentally distinct from everything non-human, question mark over the animals. Okay, Heidegger says some things about them. Sometimes they waver. Other authors come in, like Derrida, and they try to work through the nuances and complexities of Heidegger's thought about the animal. But generally speaking, Dasein is reserved to the speaking being, the human being, the being for whom being is or can be a question. And he wants to show how it was a mistake in the past not to make that distinction. And instead, having had some way of interpreting the world and the thingliness of the world, the reality of the world, the substantiality of the world, okay, the existence of the world and of the things in the world, then to mirror that back onto the human being and interpret ourselves using the terms and the categories and the key concepts that apply to the world and the things in the world, as though we are just another one of those things in the world. Here's an example. I'm in a room. My room has all this stuff in it, and I'm one of the things in the room. You might think that, right? There's like a list of things in the room, and I'm on that list. That the human being is just another of the things in the world. Heidegger said, no, that is wrong. That's incorrect. I mean, from a certain perspective, that is correct. I am in a certain way, from a certain perspective, in this room. I mean, it would be different if I was not in this room, if I was in the adjacent room, okay? Or if this room were empty, if there's no human being in this room whatsoever. So in some sense, yes, I'm itemizable. You can always look at the human being from the perspective of our mere substantiality, our bodily presence, and all the rest of it. But that's not the fundamental truth about who we are and what we are. And it's not that the fundamental truth is, you might say, this is loose, you might say the fundamental truth about who we are is more spiritual, or I'm not just the body, I'm a body and a soul, or a body and a spirit and a soul, or there's something more to me than the body that's sitting here in the chair. That doesn't capture the whole totality of who I am and what it means for me to be. But Heidegger has a rigorous way of thinking this through that does not, in the main works, let's say, in Being and Time and so on, doesn't jump quickly from the puzzle about our existence to an answer like soul or spirit. He doesn't quite go there. Okay, or you might know esoteric or occult accounts of the human being that say you have many different bodies. Your physical body is one body, but you also have your energy body and your mental body and your emotional body. And that's why you have the possibility of astral projection, because there are different planes of existence and you can be here and there depending on which vehicle you're using. Maybe that's remote viewing at work too, if you know anything about those programs. How are there remote viewers who can tell you what's going on in another part of the world while they're sitting where they are? If they've never been there before, can they project themselves astrally? Is that what's going on? Heidegger doesn't go into all of that. Heidegger doesn't talk about the esoteric occult constitution of the hidden human energy body. But what he does is he says that we have to try as much as we can, as clearly as we can, to state the basic facts as they are accessible to us, bringing to light what's distinct about human existence, the structure, nature, and character of human existence, in a discourse, philosophical discourse, that makes ourselves as much as possible transparent to ourselves, enacts the possibility of understanding being a certain sort of comprehending transparency, for example. So what does Heidegger say? He says, well, my cup is in the world, my computer is in the world, the trees are in the world, the birds are in the world, but Dasein, meaning now the human being understood as distinct, Dasein is a little bit different. It's not a being in the world, like water in a cup or a shoe in a closet, hand in a glove. It is being hyphen in hyphen the hyphen world. So he says in Being and Time, in der Weltsein, hyphenated, being in the world. Why being in the world? Why hyphenated? What does that mean? What is he talking about? Why should we care? Because for Heidegger, somehow the human being brings with himself, carries with himself, has essentially built into himself or as a part of himself, okay, the very phenomenon of world as such. Now, this is the difficult thought. This is where all of the introductions to Heidegger, they require that you have a fundamental shift in perspective. And I have tried many, many times on this channel, in my courses as well, in my books, to say the things that for some people will click on this, but it really is like it's a philosophical operation, and it's not easy, but it's worth it. But it's not like you actually have to sort of grapple with this and struggle with it. So he says, unlike the view that just takes the world as this big box or big bowl or big open space or big entity, and we are separate from the world. Here's the world, here's ourselves, and we are in the world like that. Heidegger says, no, my friends, that is not accurate. You have never been a worldless subject. You have never been an individual deprived of exposure to or being in a world or the world. You have never been. It's phenomenologically wrong. Phenomenology is the idea that you don't let theory get in the way of observation in some sense. Okay, I'm stating this roughly to sort of make the point. You actually just want to try to see what's there. And what's there is you've never been a worldless subject. You have always already been together with world as a certain sort of ordered structural phenomenon. Okay, so for Heidegger, this is crucial. Now, I have to tell you something before we get too far astray and before this video absolutely loses everybody. Remember here, this is me just trying unscripted to walk you through some pointers and some hints in understanding what Heidegger means by Dasein to help you get started or to clarify something if you've already begun. You have to know something about Heidegger. And this is going to help you as you learn through Heidegger and with Heidegger to philosophize. For Heidegger, philosophy largely is concerned with things that we take as self-evident, but that are not as self-evident as they seem. So oftentimes he's saying something or discussing something or reflecting in a way, and you're like, this is too basic. It's too simple. It's too obvious. We already know. Why are you inquiring into something that's so already well known? Why are you kind of opening doors that have been closed for so long and that your people have even forgotten that they've ever been opened or closed? Like, do you really need to ask, has the human being ever experienced himself or ever been, or does he have any phenomenological access to being a worldless subject who then enters a world? I mean, maybe we derive that view from the experience of childbirth, for example. And you're like, there was nothing. I mean, so you have the preconditions of childbirth, but then you just sort of have a coming, apparently, right? If from the point of view of an external observer watching the, or describing the process or recounting what it is for a child to be born, you have somebody new coming into the world. The world existed without this person. And then suddenly the person appears in the world. It's like, that seems pretty straightforward. Humanity has experienced that many, many, many times over many centuries and millennia. So what could possibly be a mystery about that? But Heidegger says, if you think about how modern philosophy understands human subjectivity, okay, it's not straightforward either, right? What does it mean to be a human subject? What does it mean to be a human being? Who is the human being? How do we fundamentally understand ourselves? Psychologically, neurologically, genealogically, historically, biologically, physically, chemically? What's distinctive? What's the right access point? Maybe you say all of the above. Is there some privileged perspective? Is there something that gets us closer to the truth about what it is to be a human being? And the great philosophers always include reflection on what it means to be human in their work. Kant does it when he describes the human being as transcendental a perception. Don't worry about it, but that's like one of the fundamental notions in his philosophy, or when he describes us as moral agents. And other philosophers have different accounts. But Heidegger says you must start with the fact that the human being exists in a distinct sort of way. And he doesn't just stipulate that. He doesn't just posit it. He doesn't just say, here are 10 starting points, and mine is the 11th, and mine is the right one. He goes through Kant. He goes through Descartes. He goes through medieval thinkers. He goes through an analysis of our everyday, ordinary experience, up to and including, what does it mean for there to be a pen on my table? Seems pretty banal, right? Seems pretty simple, like stupid. How could you be a philosopher who writes about why is there a pen on my table? But how do I understand the being of my pen? What is this? What is this? What is a pen? What is it? How do I characterize it properly? Just by describing its materiality? Just by describing where it was made and who made it? What's more important in the account of it? Its utility? Does it have to be all of these things? In order to answer the question about the being of my pen, I have to tell you who made it, where it was made, what it was made out of, who it was made for, what it was made for. Is it possible to even understand something like a pen without understanding the fact that there are people who write, people who need to communicate, people who have something to say, or people who draw, people who want to depict, people who want to show? So can you really understand the being of the pen without thinking about the different ways that the human being exists, as drawing, as producing, as writing, as sketching, as taking notes, as remembering, as observing, as doodling, as passing the time, as being bored, as being attentive? Suddenly, it's not possible to think about the being of the pen without thinking about the human being, the way the human being is, the way the human being expresses himself or herself, the way the human being does things or doesn't do them. And then you maybe have heard before Heidegger and his hammer, what happens when a hammer breaks or something. So what about the where of the pen? If I want to know where the pen is, am I really just thinking about spatial coordinates? Am I really just thinking about measurable distance? Do I really just want to take a ruler, which happens to be here? It's not a prop for this part of my thinking out loud with you. Do I just have to take it and measure it? Make sure my pen is always whatever, 30 centimeters, 15 centimeters. Heidegger says, when it comes to the human being, things are different than they are with the non-human beings. And they're not just mathematical, they're not just physical, they're not just chemical. He says, if I want to know the distance between two objects, let's say I can measure that distance. Okay, if I'm just treating somehow a world of mathematical abstraction, I can treat distance under the rubric of mathematical abstraction. I can take a measurement. There's no problem. Heidegger knows you measure, right? If I need to put up a light or put up a painting or something like that, I'm going to need to measure, let's say. But he says, measurement, even measurement, it's not so straightforward when it comes to human affairs, because if I'm walking down the street to see my friend, the street under my feet is closer to me from the point of view of measurement than the friend who's down the road, whom I'm encountering. But existentially, the person is closer to me than the ground. Now you might think, oh, look, Heidegger, come on, you're fudging words here. When you say existentially, you just mean what? Psychologically, emotionally? No, he doesn't. He means that the being of distance has a different character when we're talking about the human being. The being of time has a different character when we're trying to understand the being of the human being. The being of space has a different character when we're trying to understand the being of the human being. What it means to be in. This is the craziest thing. If you don't know Heidegger, he has a whole section in the book Being and Time on what it means to be in. Remember what I said. A shoe is in the closet. In means one thing when it relates to two objective, unhuman things. Okay? Shoe, closet. Okay, now shoe is still a human thing in the sense that you have their style, fashion, footwear, walking, and basketball shoes, tennis shoes, dance shoes. That's not my point, though. My point is the relationship of two non-human objects to one another. When we say the word in, we mean that one of them is spatially enclosed by the other one. But Heidegger, and again, if you want the full details, you have to read Being and Time. You can do my course on Being and Time. You could read somebody else's stuff on Being and Time. Okay, but when he says the human being is being hyphen in hyphen the hyphen world, remember that? In der Weltsein. That's what Dasein means. That's what the human being is characterized like in Being and Time. What it means for the human being to be in the world is different. It doesn't mean we're spatially enclosed by the world. It means that we're always involved in a certain way, expressing a mode of existence. Okay? Being concerned, being active, being bored, being engaged, being reflective, being indifferent, being tranquil, being worked up, being in the zone. Those are the human being's ways or modes of being in the world. You couldn't say that about a shoe in a closet. You couldn't say that about water in a cup. But you can say that about Dasein. You can say that about in der Weltsein. You can say that about being in the world. Okay? As I say, it's not easy. It is not abstract theorizing. It is Heidegger's attempt, after thousands of years of a philosophical history, to put things into words that bring out a distinct but overlooked truth of the human being and our relationship to being as such, and our distinction from non-human beings. Okay, well, I want to tell you something really briefly, which is that if you follow this channel, or if you're new to this channel, you'll see I put out videos on politics sometimes, article readings and things like that, on philosophy, videos on Heidegger, Nietzsche, Derrida, and other thinkers, and sometimes discussing with you books, sometimes prepared remarks, sometimes like today, off-the-cuff remarks on a topic that some of you might find interesting. And I do that kind of ad hoc. I don't have a regular publication schedule, but I have decided to put out one video a day for the next 5 days. That's the goal here. Okay, just to try to see what that's like for me, for you, for the channel, what sort of topics do well, what I enjoy talking about, what you enjoy hearing. So today was a little bit more on that topic. What is Dasein, or rather, who is Dasein? What's unique about the human being compared to other beings? How do we get new access to Heidegger through this reflection? You know, my last video on the channel was another explanation of other components of Heidegger's thought. You should know I have other videos on this, but I might as well tell you. For me, and for the people who are important to me, many of whom you'll see me talk about on this channel, Heidegger is not just another philosopher. Okay? It's not like there are 10 philosophers, pick and choose whichever one you happen to talk about. For everybody, it doesn't really matter if they're on the left or on the right, if they're in the center, if they are this, that, or the other thing, okay, if they're in this country or that country. For really most of the thinkers who are the most meaningful to me personally, and who I find most insightful and thoughtful, Heidegger is somehow the bar. You know, Heidegger is the standard. Heidegger is the great question for all of them. Leo Strauss, Derrida, Rorty, Dugin, those are the four I wrote about in my dissertation, my book, beginning with Heidegger. Okay, there are others as well. Emmanuel Levinas, okay, for example. Jewish thinkers, non-Jewish thinkers, Christian thinkers, Islamic thinkers. These people all found something truly insightful, profound, lucid, exciting, true in Heidegger's works. And Heidegger is just the sometimes acknowledged, sometimes unacknowledged grand master of various schools of thought. You may not even know the extent to which Alain Badiou or these other thinkers, whoever you might be interested in at a certain time, owe some fundamental part of their reflections to what they learned from Heidegger, whether they follow him or not, whether it was this book or that, whether it's what he says about anxiety or what he says about understanding or what he says about the they or what he says about something else. Okay, but Heidegger is often, as I say, the acknowledged or unacknowledged Grand Master. Take Jordan Peterson. If you've been one of the however many tens of millions of people in the world who read 12 Rules for Life, read the first few pages of that and you'll see. I think he's got a substantial footnote there where he credits Heidegger's notion of being. He says, oftentimes throughout this book, I'm going to say something about being, and I have in mind what Heidegger wrote about being. So acknowledgement of the significance of Heidegger's work to Peterson in the introduction and some lengthy footnote, I can't remember, one of the early pages. And the fact that all of these great thinkers, okay, as I say, Leo Strauss, if you've never heard of him, top 3, top 2, when it comes to political philosophy, number 1, most insightful and important thinker for us, in my opinion. And Leo Strauss acknowledged Heidegger as the greatest thinker. He was constantly trying to understand what we can learn from Heidegger, what Heidegger got right, what he got wrong, what he means for philosophy, what he means for political philosophy, what he means for our understanding of the human situation, of the truth of things. Okay, so always thinking about Heidegger. Not only Heidegger. Strauss wrote books on everybody: Plato, Xenophon, Aristotle, Machiavelli, Maimonides, Hobbes. Leo Strauss is a whole separate topic. If you're here for the Heidegger and you don't know Strauss, you have to know Strauss. Just like in my other videos, if they're there for the Strauss and they don't know Heidegger, they have to know Heidegger. Okay, Derrida. I have videos on Derrida on this channel. Derrida has said, basically, no Heidegger, no Derrida, if you need to put it in 2 words. And Derrida has written some things that are extremely insightful about Heidegger, like Heidegger's Ear, for example, and other pieces of writing. All right, so that's why we think about him, not just because of his influence on these other great thinkers across the political and ideological and intellectual and theoretical and geopolitical spectrum, not just because of his influence, but also, I'll just share this with you. As I told you, this was an unscripted kind of video. What would you call it? A rant? No, it's not a rant. But okay, if you're here and you're listening, then you might find this interesting. A lot of the people who studied Heidegger with me when I opened my school, millermanschool.com, or when I told people that I was doing private tutoring, they had a background, which I didn't know. I didn't expect it. I wasn't looking for it. It just happened to be the case. And then I got interested in it. They had background in Buddhism, in Zen Buddhism, and other religious or spiritual practices, often, but not always, Eastern. And they told me, since I'm not an expert in those fields, but I knew Heidegger and tried to explain him as best as I could when we read Being and Time together or other books of his together, they told me that they were having insight after insight and boom, light bulb after light bulb in reading and discussing Heidegger in a way that connected to their understanding of their other religious practices. Zen, Buddhism, as I said, in some cases, mysticism of certain kinds, in other cases, spirituality, this, that, and the other things. So Heidegger allows, in some cases, people to have breakthrough insights into basic human concerns. What does it mean to be? What does it mean to exist? Not at the level that you sometimes get it, a popularized spirituality or pseudo-spirituality or pop spirituality. Also, not just your typical Stoic self-control. You can't affect that, but you can always affect this. Somehow at a deeper level. There's something that I always hear when I'm discussing Heidegger with my students. Okay, my students, you have to understand, the professionals in their 30s and 40s in tech, law, finance, and education who come to me to reconnect with a love for philosophy or to understand something that they have reason to believe is important. One thing I always and inevitably hear, rightfully so, it's my experience with Heidegger too, is that it's just a different level of depth. It's more foundational. It's more fundamental. It reaches the ground floor. Okay? If all of these great thinkers are somehow operating in a hotel, I've used this image somewhere before, some of them are on the 5th floor and they're different, but they're kind of like your room 505, your room 503, your room 515. So yeah, you're different, okay, but you're all on the same floor and it's not the ground floor. But Heidegger, he goes to the bottom of things. At times that can mean spending 200 pages or 300 pages or several books on something that seems extremely self-evident, but it isn't. That's the amazing thing. There's a deep and deeply satisfying mystery at the heart of even ordinary everyday life that Heidegger brings to the surface without it just being, as I say, anything other than beautiful philosophy. Okay, meaning he's not invoking supernatural entities, although he does talk about the god or the gods in some places, which we'll have to talk about and think about another time. He doesn't talk about astral bodies. He doesn't talk about how astrology influences the mind. He's not Aleister Crowley in the Ouija board. He's not talking about initiation societies. And somehow, through the pure, pristine, crystalline, beautiful, just transparency of philosophical inquiry, somehow allowing himself to just be dedicated to the task of bringing the understanding of being to light through language. It's like something that many people have never experienced before. Okay, what can I tell you? I'm not the first, and I won't be the last. I'm just trying to pass it on to you to a certain extent, those of you who find something here to be interested in. And it's not hero worship, and he's not a guru. Okay, he's important to understand for the history of Western philosophy. He's influenced several fields of thought. There are many great thinkers that you can't understand without knowing their background. In Heidegger, Heidegger himself is independently extremely insightful and valuable. His commentaries on thinkers like Kant can be extremely helpful. He should be a part of your intellectual apparatus. He shouldn't be the only person you study, in my view, Leo Strauss, at a minimum, because Heidegger talks about being, and philosophy and the history of philosophy. But Leo Strauss reminds us that you must understand political philosophy, not just what it means, but what it means to be just. Not just what it means to be a human being, but what it means to be a good human being. Okay, so it's helpful to have somebody else besides Heidegger. And I talk about Dugin all the time on this channel, because Dugin introduces more than Heidegger does. There's some of this in Heidegger, but Dugin introduces much more of it. Parallelisms to other thinkers, and the dimension as well as politics, so to geopolitics. You know, Heidegger is a crucial component of Dugin's model of a multipolar world, for example. So it's incredible stuff. But to go back to the basics, I doubt anybody's still watching this video 30 minutes in. How could that be? If you are, congratulations. It's the kind of patience you're going to need to have understanding with Heidegger. Dasein used to mean existence of just anything. Now it means, for Heidegger, the specific human existence. Why? Because the way of human being is distinct from the way of any other being. And that means everything needs to be reconsidered from the beginning, including such apparent banalities and trivialities as the meaning of being in. So, if you enjoyed that, please like, share, comment, subscribe. My book is heideggerbook.com. I have a course on being in time, heideggercourse.com. My school is millermanschool.com. Okay, I write on Substack. Everywhere where I try to share things with you that are, to me anyways, beautiful, interesting, exciting, thought-provoking, and life-enriching. So take a look at that, and thank you for spending your time here. Hope this was helpful to you. See you in the next video.